I'm going to start with a spoiler. No, it can't. But it's not time to go home yet. What I want to do with this is not really do a deep dive into AI or look particularly at the online safety bill or anything like that. I really want to talk about AI literacy and any techs here? Anyone from the tech sector here? So you've probably had but surely it can do that. And those sorts of, but we've promised the client now, so just get on and do it. Those sorts of things. And I think I'm going to particularly dwell on political rhetoric around this issue because when I wrote this lecture, the online safety bill hadn't reached royal assent. Now it has reached royal assent, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the challenging language around that, and almost like the belief that, well, I've seen what AI can do now. I've used ChatGPT. It's amazing. So why can't it do that? And just some issues around there, really. There's my email address. If folk do want to contact me after this, you are very welcome to. I generally sit in my office in Cornwall writing, and I'm always online, so I'm always very happy to hear from folk. Occasionally, I get someone going, 3 years ago, I saw a talk of yours. Can I just ask about this thing that's happening at my kid's school? That's fine as well. Don't mind doing that as well. I'm not going to do a deep dive into machine learning. I'm going to look very briefly about the broad functioning of it and why it works in certain areas and why it doesn't work in other areas. But as I said, I'm going to spend a lot of the time looking at specific use cases and looking at the challenges of those and looking at how we've got to this position at the moment, because we are, undoubtedly in a very exciting time for artificial intelligence. And I think probably because it is so visible now and because we can get hold of it and see what you can do with it, it is something where people are very, very excited, and we should be. But equally, there are parameters we need to think about and use cases we need to think about. And if we understand a little bit about how it works, we are probably in a better position to be able to look at the demands and things. Because I think one of the things I find, particularly with the online safety bill, which, as I said, reached assent this week, is it's become, don't worry, yes, there are issues about children online. Don't worry, the online safety bill is going to sort it. I don't know if you saw, but in the press a few weeks ago, there was another report about sexual harassment, sexual violence in schools, and there was discussion there about young men accessing pornography and getting unrealistic expectations around sex and relationships and things. And the response to that from government was, don't worry, the online safety bill is going to sort all that sort of thing out. We'll stop young people looking at pornography, and then we don't have to worry about that anymore. And I find that quite challenging because I think from my perspective, I've spent the last 20 years talking to young people about how the online world affects their lives. And when I bring this talk to a close, I'll talk a little bit more about that. But the idea of platform liability, which is pretty much what the online safety bill does, it's like the platforms need to sort this out now, is one thread, but it's certainly not a lot of what young people tell me about how, if you say, how can we help you have a better online experience? It's very rare they talk about technical intervention, but I'll come back to that in a little while. A little bit more about me, though. Somewhat unusually, I think it's probably fair to say in this area, I'm an academic with a tech background. Probably before some of you were born, I was writing genetic algorithm code for engineering optimization problems in the 90s. In those days, we had to write it from the ground up, which sometimes means I'm a little bit more sympathetic to the demands that are placed on the tech sector than some, maybe. Not that I don't think the tech sector has some serious responsibilities here, but equally, they haven't got the solution on their own. I've already said I've spent a lot of time talking to young people. I think the other thing that's important in this situation is I will flag up the fact I am a parent. From government ministers to high court judges to people I'm socializing with, they'll hear, what's it you do? You cover stuff about online harms. Well, my son, and then you get this discussion about, and everyone takes not everyone, lots of people will take a parental perspective. As you might imagine, my kids, who are nearly 20 and 21 now, had an interesting teenage years with me as a father, probably sometimes asking questions that, or maybe they weren't wishing that I was asking, but equally, we always had some very frank conversations. It's generally when a group of their friends were up, they'd be asking all the questions that they couldn't ask at school, or they couldn't ask other people because they were just told, just don't look at it, all right? So it's been an interesting time. I'm also a fellow of the BCS, for those of you that are involved with the BCS. I'm going to start. We sometimes, if you'd look at this historically, AI has been around for quite a long time now. 50s, 60s was where the first AI summer came from. We talk about AI summers, AI winters. Some folks say we're still in the biggest AI summer now. Some folks say we're in the AI autumn. But the third one, if we look back historically, there was another really big AI boom in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s. If any of you remember that time, expert systems were going to replace GPs, all those sorts of things, and similar sorts of discussions around, is it going to replace jobs and all those sorts of things. I had lunch, I don't know if any of you have ever heard of him, but there's my old academic mentor, Professor Frank Land, who was at the LSE for 50 years. I had lunch with him the other day. He's 96 now. And I said to him, what do you think about all this AI that's going on at the moment, Frank? And he went, I've seen it all before. I went, really? It's like, well, no, it is different now. We have far greater data processing power than we used to. We have far greater processing power than we used to. I think he was a little bit sore because ChatGPT had said he was dead, so I think he was a bit annoyed about that. But, he was sort of saying, having an understanding of how it works gives you a more richer experience with it, is kind of what he was saying. But, yeah, he was also saying, we never seem to learn from history when it comes to computer science. A lot of these things have happened before in different means and things. But as I said, I think probably one of the most visible things around AI at the moment is it's so available to us all. Because you can just sign up and go onto ChatGPT, and every university in the country is absolutely terrified about, wow, we're going to have to do something other than set essays now, aren't we? Because, interestingly, I did a visit to King's a while ago, to the computer science department there, and King's do some very good AI research. I said, what are you doing about GPT? And they said, well, I was talking to the students about it. They said, well, we got it to generate some code. The professor said to get it to generate some code based on a problem. And then we unpicked it, and then we started to look at where the bugs were in the code. And then we went on, and we started to try and understand how it worked in order to create those bugs in the first place. That sounds like a really progressive view of embracing these technologies. Some of the universities just sent out a memo to all students going, if you use ChatGPT, you will be failed. It's like, well, how do you know, first of all? And secondly, really, again, from history, we look 20 years ago, the search engine. You can't use search engines to write essays. And now, can you imagine a time where you wouldn't be using a search engine to do these sorts of things? It's a bit like trying to fight the tide. It really is. So we should be embracing them and looking at these positive aspects of it. But there are some things starting to creak at the moment. I'll look at a few examples of that sort of thing as I go along the way now. But I think this one, first of all, is the sheer amount of data that's being processed, and the processing power we've got is very different to how it's been before. So I'll come back and talk a little bit about training data in a minute, but the sheer volumes of training data you can use are better than they were before, and you can process it a lot faster. So it does look amazing because it's writing this stuff in real time, and I've ego surfed on ChatGPT. It was about 75% accurate about what I did, and then, although I've noticed, I don't know if anyone else has done it, but more recently it's come up with this disclaimer at the end going, however, our data was collected in September 2021, so you might like to look up other sources because academic careers change and they might be somewhere else now, which is quite different to, I can't remember what it placed me at an institution I've never worked at a while ago. But there's some fantastic things that have happened. Massive improvements generally in what I might refer to as narrow domain areas. So one of the examples in the transcript alongside this is around tumor diagnosis. There's amazing developments around tumor diagnosis now. It's a fairly closed system, if you like. You can feed it tons and tons and tons of medical data, and it's getting extremely accurate at diagnosing when it's shown a new scan, whether it's a tumor, whether it's needs treatment, or whether it's something not to worry about. The US government are talking about that a great deal at the moment. If you look at something like gaming, AI has massive improvements in gaming. Any gamers here? It's interesting. No one ever wants to admit they're a gamer. It's all right to be a gamer. It's fine. But you know, the AI in games is way better than it used to be. We have all these visible content creation things now. Although apparently in Vic's lecture on Tuesday, some examples of AI-generated images did produce some interesting response. It's normally the fingers. I don't know if any of you have done some of it's normally can't quite get, you end up with 15 fingers on each hand and things. But it's really impressive stuff. And the fact you can do that on your phone is equally impressive as well. But it starts to become more complex. First of all, if you've got a limited amount of data. But also when you are in messy, complex systems with maybe lots of human intervention and similar, which you might look at, for example, social media as an example of that. And I'll come on to that in a little while. Still, there are some challenges around creativity. It's you know, there have been people say, well, the easiest way to get automated vehicles on the roads is to stop humans driving cars. Because, you know, it's fine if the entire system can work on its own, you know. You see some great progress in automated vehicles and things at the moment, but I live in North Cornwall, fairly remote. Send an automated vehicle up my lane when a sheep's jumping out, or there's a fire up in the hedges, and it starts to become more problematic. But so it's always the edge cases that cause the problems there. But yeah, clearly there is an awful lot of great stuff to look at within the AI world now. But one of the challenges with that is but you've done that, so why can't you do that? And I think that's kind of where we are in the what I might broadly say the online harms world is. One of the other things I do occasionally is sort of mediate between organizations. And I was contacted a while ago by a charity I do quite a lot of work with, and they said, "Oh, we're commissioning a development company to provide a new online facility." Now, they run a helpline that supports victims of fairly serious online abuse. And I said, okay, that's interesting, because they run the line between 9 to 5, and they're saying, you know, because of the domestic nature of a lot of this abuse, we need to support victims outside of the 9 to 5 time as well. We've had this company come to us. They say they've got a solution where we can implement some sort of a chatbot, and it's all right because they're using AI. It's very exciting. I said, but what are they doing with the AI then? I said, no, they said that they've got a lot of experience in building these AI systems, and they need to get our case data, and they're going to train it with our case data, and then it's going to support victims. I said, well, it seems like quite a leap, because every single one of the cases you deal with, because I know about the cases you deal with, are unique. It's very unusual that you will see one person's experience be the same as another person's experience. So if you're starting to feed it where every single case is unique, how is it going to generalize from that? And they sort of accuse me of being a cynic and all those sorts of things. And I'm just the old guy that goes, I've seen it all before. But then about 6 months later, I say, how's it going? It's like, well, they haven't delivered everything we expected. It's like, oh, okay. Why would that be then? Well, they said the data's quite difficult because every case is unique. I'm like, I should have recorded myself saying it. No, it wasn't anybody's fault. I think, on the one hand, the developers were saying we've got lots of experience of providing chatbot solutions to things. And the procurers had gone, this is great. And they hadn't really explored the sorts of data because they were bringing it from their perspective, and the charity weren't sufficiently articulating the requirements of what they wanted. And I think that's always, I can remember years ago doing a bit of mediation between a charity and a tech company. So they were supposed to build us a website. They haven't done what we wanted. I said, well, where's your requirements spec then? And they went, the what? It's like, well, how can you possibly know what you wanted, or how do they know what you want without some sort of formal documentation? And they went, well, we just told them. So yeah, anyway. And I think, one of the things, it's just saying it's okay we're using AI. It's a bit like saying it's okay we're using maths or something. It of itself, it's not the solution. It's how you apply these solutions. Now, to the techs in the room, I now apologize, because this is as detailed as I'm going to get around AI, or more specifically machine learning. Most of the techniques that are being used at the moment focus very much on machine learning. And this is a very basic model, because I don't want to go in. I've used 20 minutes already. I don't want to talk about supervised learning and unsupervised learning and all sorts of different sorts of learning and feed-forward networks and all those sorts of things. You take an algorithm. I'll come on to algorithms in a minute. You take it, you feed it data. The more data you feed it, because of how extremely well put together they are now. I can remember when I was doing my PhD, a friend of mine building a neural network from scratch. Now he earns a huge amount of money working in financial systems. So it's always financial systems, isn't it? But the more you feed it, because it's learning, by learning it's recognizing data, so if you then start to show it similar data, it starts to recognize it. And then you look at the model and see what it's producing, and then you see what the outputs are and whether it's being accurate and whether it's being inaccurate, and then you improve it. There is an apocryphal tale of image recognition, which some of you, any of you heard of the tank recognition system? Didn't actually happen, but it's a really good way of explaining image recognition. So a military system was developed to recognize tanks, and the system was trained with photographs of friendly tanks and photographs of enemy tanks, and it was trained with data, and it was building up over time. And then it was shown a picture of a new tank, so not from the training data, but from and it was almost 100% accurate in determining whether that was an enemy tank or whether it was a friendly tank. So this is fantastic, we need to get this on the battlefield. And then they deployed it in battlefield situation, and it went down to about 50-50 again, almost completely random in how accurate it was. They went, but in the lab it worked really, really well. Why isn't it working? And they looked back at the training data, and it turned out that all the friendly tanks were photographed on a sunny day, and all the enemy tanks were photographed on a cloudy day. So what the algorithm was actually doing was determining whether it was a sunny day or whether it was a cloudy day. Now, as I said, that's an apocryphal tale, but it's a nice way of explaining how image recognition works. And sometimes you go, well, we don't actually know what's going on in the middle of that box, but we know the stuff that's coming out at the end of it is really, really good. I think we're starting to understand what goes on in the middle more than we once did. But also, it's just a nice way to illustrate that model. But things do go wrong. Now, algorithms, they're bad, aren't they? I did some training to a bunch of safeguarding professionals a while ago around young people on online harms. And I always say to the organizer, is there anything specific anyone wants me to look at? And one of the requests that came back, can he talk more about the bad algorithms? So, sorry? It's like, well, algorithms are bad, aren't they? No, they're not. There has been this thing now where there was something on the BBC this morning about TikTok and recommendation engines. I don't know if any of you saw it, where TikTok was supposedly recommending excitable videos about... Is that thunder? Where it was saying, one of the examples it gave was TikTok promoted a lot of videos about the Nicola Bulley suicide, and as a result of that, people were turning up at the village. It was because of the recommendation engines and because of TikTok's algorithm. And it was kind of interesting because you're kind of thinking, well, the mainstream media were doing a huge amount of coverage of that story at the same time. So to try and isolate it and say, well, TikTok drove people to go to that village was a bit of an odd one anyway. But it was just I think one of the tabloids had 15 articles in one day about that case. So, and then everyone said, it's terrible what TikTok's done. Now, there are challenges with recommendation engines. I certainly wouldn't disagree with that. But it was the language was, again, it's the algorithm. It's that algorithm. So, and one of the more famous ones in recent time was during lockdown. Obviously, young people couldn't sit exams, so it was based on teacher assessment, and that was sent off to the DFE for processing and to make sure it was all normalized. And when people started to unpick the results, which so the college gave data to the centre then said they were running it through a normalization process, and then young people got their grades. And they started to unpick it, go, well, people in deprived areas seem to be getting, generally speaking, lower grades than people in affluent areas. That's a bit dodgy, isn't it? It's quite good being in this room with and then Boris Johnson came out, because obviously there was a lot of negative press around this. Boris Johnson came out, it's because of this mutant algorithm. Mutant algorithm, that's interesting, isn't it? And there was another story a while ago as well. The links are in the handout that goes along with this, where the UK passport photo checking service was rejecting photographs of people of colour and not rejecting white folks' photographs. And again, the racist algorithm. An algorithm can only do what it's told to do, I think it's fair to say. It's not going to go, I know I've been told to do this, but I've decided to do something different. Now, in terms of the passport checking service, it is far more likely that was as a result of... Anyone read Weapons of Mass Destruction by Cathy O'Neill? She talks about this quite a lot. Again, it's in the handout. But you can build a biased data set, and you can feed that biased data set in as training data. So it is far more likely that the training data for that system had far more white people than people of colour in it. So it was far more accurate at assessing the acceptability of the photograph from a white person than from a person of colour. But to say the algorithm was racist gives it a sentience that it really simply doesn't have. And I think that's one of the interesting things around a lot of the discourse in this area. I think a former Secretary of State was very clear that people should stop using algorithms because algorithms are bad, which is a really interesting concept for those coders amongst you. So what I want to do now is just look at some use cases and look at the challenges we have in saying, why can't you get AI or machine learning to solve this? I'm going to take 3 snippets of political rhetoric. I'm deliberately not naming the people, although one you can probably make a quick inference from, because it's not really about picking on somebody and going, look at this person, they said something. It's more about looking at the nature of the political rhetoric and seeing why that presents such challenges. So I'm going to start off with this one from, after the Euros, there was a lot of racist abuse of some of the England footballers on Twitter, and this was a challenge in Prime Minister's questions at the time. And the person who was Prime Minister at the time, now we've had a few recently, so you might not be able to guess from that, but it was this statement here. It's the bit at the bottom that I find particularly problematic in terms of the rhetoric being used. We all know they have the technology to do it. So they could stamp out racism if they wanted to, is the implication there. And this then feeds into discourse around child protection as well. Children are abused online, children see language and discourse they don't like. Well, the platforms just need to stop that from happening. Children see content that we don't want them to see. Well, the platforms need to stop that from happening. Now, tech code is very good at symbolic matching. So if someone is using racist keywords, very easy to detect. Someone is not using racist keywords, and bearing in mind, this was in the days when Twitter still had a large safety team. This was the pre-Musk days and things. So So there is, if you reported a racist tweet, you would get a report back saying, we've looked at that, we've suspended the account and similar. But the idea that they can detect this and stop racism if they want to is kind of problematic because it implies, well, you just solve this stuff. So has anyone ever had this on Facebook? You've posted something up. Surely it's not just me. You post something up, and this appears about 5 minutes later, normally about 5 minutes later. God, you feel awful. We think what you said might, I didn't mean anything nasty by it. Is there anyone I can phone up and apologize to? I feel terrible now. Now, this is the nature. I think the language of this statement is particularly interesting if you look at it from how you might train an algorithm to do this. It's similar to others we've removed for bullying and harassment. So clearly they've built up a big corpus of abusive terms, and there's an awful lot of academic research that goes into there as well. You build up a corpus of abusive terms, and you try and get it to detect whether a term is abusive. And it works to a certain point, particularly good if you're looking at a basic keyword matching, but if you're looking at tone and nature of tone and things, the sentiment, it works. It's less good at detecting sarcasm or satire. I got a warning a while ago because I'd said something. Someone was mocking me for my rural life, and I said, yeah, I just went out and threw a copper kettle at a tourist. Clearly I hadn't done that, but I got a community standards warning. I didn't really throw a copper kettle at anybody. I don't even own a copper kettle. But brought home for me, does anyone know this place? Plymouth? What part of Plymouth?
Is it the Hoe?
There you go, Plymouth Hoe. I posted a comment about Plymouth Hoe a couple of years ago, got a community standards warning. Now, I do know a few folk at Meta and said, can you just tell your engineers that Plymouth Hoe is a location, not a person, please? I wasn't being nasty about it. But if we are saying, you need to do more, and that's a standard piece of political rhetoric, do more, they will generally err on the side of conservative because they don't want to be in a position where you have the outrage in the papers and look at this. But yeah, it doesn't happen anymore, so if you go home later and post that, I'd like to go to Plymouth Hoe. It's been sorted, but it was just an interesting little vignette from my perspective in that, I know why that happened. Now, this was from a recent debate on the online safety bill. Age verification is a challenge that has been going on for a very long time. Most of the political drive around this is the challenge that young people are accessing pornography. We don't want young people to access pornography, which I completely agree with, having had conversations with teenagers who are clearly desensitized and had performance anxieties and size anxieties and similar. And then the solution is, well, we'll just age gate it. We'll just make sure anyone who provides this sort of content has to get the user to prove they are 18 before that happens, before they're allowed to. I think highly effective is the thing that I find. If you are a platform that's being told we're going to regulate, you need to develop something that is highly effective. What does that actually mean? I'll come back to the term internet safety or online safety at the end. Have we all in this room and online uniformly got a single way to demonstrate we're all over the age of 18? I would suggest not. And this is one of the challenges with age verification in the UK. I have said before, there's an easy solution, we just need an ID card. I was being sarcastic because I think bringing in a universal ID card brings a lot of its own challenges in terms of privacy and abuse of power and similar. But if you're saying we need to demonstrate through passport or we need to demonstrate through driving license, well, those are both token-based age verification devices where not everyone has to have one. There's no mandatory reason to have it. There's also a financial barrier. The challenge in this area particularly, if you're looking at pornography, is this is legal content for adults. So if you're saying we need to stop young people seeing it, but adults are perfectly legally entitled to look at it, then you don't want a situation where a large number of adults can't look at it because of the way we've implemented age verification. The Digital Economy Act in 2017 very strongly talked about age verification, and pornography providers then revoked the legislation a year later because there were lots of questions about privacy issues and those sorts of things. It's been acknowledged now that age verification using a token-based system is a challenge. But now we're starting to go, well, why couldn't AI do it? You know, it's ever so clever AI, so why don't we have age estimation technologies that can use it as well? If you look at the Information Commissioner's age-appropriate design code, one of the suggestions, which is actually quite good on the whole, one of the suggestions in that is that providers might like to consider using an artificial intelligence-based solution for age estimation. Now, Yoti, who are certainly one of the leaders in this area, produced a white paper last year saying, we're about 95.5% accurate on estimating the age that someone is under 23. How would you build this sort of system? You collect up loads and loads of photographs of people, knowing their ages, feed them in as a training data set. Do you remember, I don't know if you, as I said, I'm getting on a bit now. There used to be regular local press stories about how the local stationers had sold glue to a 13-year-old and those sorts of things. Remember those sorts of stories? I can remember it happening. My friend's mum worked in a local station. She came home one day in tears saying, well, I've had the local press phone me up saying, I sold glue to a 14-year-old and she looked 18. So if humans find it difficult to actually expect an algorithm to do it effectively, now we might say, that's accurate enough. But equally, we've then got the ethical challenge of saying there are going to be some people, sorry, sir, sorry, madam, you're very fresh-faced. We're not sure you're over 18, so we're not going to let you access this content that you are legally entitled to access. Starts to become an issue then. And then we get into 13, which is the digital age of consent. It's the number that all social media platforms are generally set by in terms of data collection from children, those sorts of things. That becomes even more challenging. Because first of all, what token-based authentication might we be using? And secondly, are we talking about building a large database from children of that age that we are then going to use as training data? So there starts to become some fairly significant challenges there. I spoke to someone from the AV industry last week. Said 18 is difficult enough. What about 13? He went, it's really difficult. If we could access school data, it'd be brilliant. But obviously, there are some significant challenges in that sort of thing as well. But the other thing is, this is proposed as the solution. If we put age gating on pornography sites, children will no longer be able to access pornography. And that's really quite challenging, because what that's actually saying is if we stop it, we don't have to address this social problem. A lot of pornography that young people access is peer-generated and shared on mobile phones and similar. Young people will tell me, well, yeah, it's only UK-based, isn't it? So I'll just get a VPN and bypass it. And then you get into political discussion about, should we look at the legalities of VPNs? It's like, well, I think privacy is a fundamental human right. I think we still agree with that. So when you start to talk, because you're sort of moving further and further into the extreme position, young people and VPNs. And there's lots of reasons. You know, the dark web is another one where dark web's terrible. And we did a lot of work with young people on this sort of thing. And generally speaking, you go, what about the dark web? They go, no, it's bad. You stay off it. Have you ever used it? No. One group of young people we spoke to said, well, yeah, it's brilliant. So why is it brilliant? No one can see what you're browsing. That was a group of LGBT young people, some of whom said they had homophobic parents, for example. And it allowed them to browse in private. So slight tangent there. But if you're talking about self-produced intimate imagery by teenagers, that's not going to be age-gated. That's going to be delivered on your phone, on a group chat, on a message, whatever. Which leads us on to the final piece of rhetoric I really want to look at. All the main providers now have technology to identify a nude image. And because now we've got age verification technology, which we kind of have, we can identify that it's a nude, we can identify it's a young person using the phone, we can stop that image from being transmitted. I could do a whole hour on the legalities and the challenges of teenagers and intimate images. I've written a book on it, it's a cracking read. You should go out and buy it, it's great. This isn't the first time this has been said. There have been a number of other times in select committees that are similar. We've got the technology to identify a nude image now, and if it's a young person, we should stop it from being sent. These clever algorithms, they can do that, can't they? You clever techie people, why haven't you implemented this yet? To unpick this, you know what I was saying about training data for algorithms? You feed it a load of images of the thing you wanted to detect, and then it gets more and more accurate in detecting those sorts of things. Nudity is a challenge. I don't know whether anyone's got any experience of nudity detection algorithms. You might not want to put your hand up if that's the case. But nudity is a challenge. Why is that? Because it's a very broad domain. How people pose in nude images and things isn't similar. I'm not going to go into the detail, but you know what I mean. And traditionally, large platforms have had a big challenge with controlling how people put this stuff up. It's getting a lot better. As with all of these things, it's getting a lot better. But specifically, it's saying intimate images of children. How can we build a system that identifies an intimate image of a child and prevents it from being sent? So what do you think that training data might look like? And that's where it becomes really, really problematic. Now, there are some law enforcement systems that train triaging for child abuse data on these sorts of things. I won't get into that now, but that also presents some interesting ethical challenges. But the idea that an app provider, for example, well, you need your training data, and you need to build in the functionality that starts to become really, really quite problematic. But from the public rhetoric, there's a politician that stood up in Parliament and said they can do it, so why aren't they? It's like, well, because it's far more complicated than that. And then you get into determining the age of the device. We've already established that age verification technology isn't perfect. You've also got hand-me-down phones. You've also got pay-as-you-go phones and similar, where you haven't quite got the accuracy. Are we then going to be in a situation where an adult takes an intimate image and the app goes, you can't send that because we don't think you're old? It starts to become really problematic in terms of rights. And then the prevention of transmission. It's not just SMS. It could be any one of many, many messaging platforms. Are we saying that every single app provider needs to do this, or are we talking about doing it at a mobile level? Once you start to unpick it, it starts to become really, really quite complicated. And there's lots of other things as an ecosystem we could be doing rather than just sitting there going, can't they just get some clever software to stop this? Because that's easiest for us. So can AI protect children? No. Can't, sorry. But it could be used as part of a toolbox for technical interventions, and platforms already do this stuff. There's lots of machine learning-based aspects of safety tech within platforms. But sitting there and going, this happens online, this happens via digital technology, therefore digital technology can solve it, is something that I find quite problematic, and I'll come back to that in a little while. I see some really good stuff happening outside of the AI world. I don't know if anyone's heard of Stop NCII, which is a development by a charity with a lot of in-kind contribution from Meta, which uses I hesitate to use the word because hashing isn't just fairly straightforward technology. But what this is doing is, if you've taken some intimate images of yourself and sent it to somebody, and then that somebody is then abusing you, they've either uploaded those images somewhere or they're threatening to upload those images, what you can do is download a piece of software, run something called hashing, which basically just runs a piece of code onto the image, processes the data in the image, and produces something like a fingerprint of that image. So rather than having to share that image with other people and going, I think this image of me is out there, you share the hash instead. That goes into a large database, and lots of technology providers are now taking that hash database. So if someone does try and upload it onto their platform, it'll go down the hash list and go, no. And it's really interesting because it's not very well known. But as a simple model of empowerment, now it was set up to protect adult victims of image-based abuse, but NECMEC, whose acronym always escapes me, Vic, National Center for Missing and Exploited Children in the US is now saying we're going to provide this for young people as well. So young people who might be being victimized or coerced or something as a result of sharing these images can also... Now, it's not perfect. There are lots of challenges in terms of what happens if someone wants to upload hashes that aren't of intimate images and they're just trying to poison the database and similar. But it's a really nice example of something that's away from the complexities of machine learning and similar, and it addresses a point, and it provides empowerment to the victims. But all of these things... I run a survey with a charity I work with called Southwest Bridge for Learning. We've got around 16,000 responses from you. It's basic. It's a fairly basic survey asking them about their online behavior. One of the questions we ask is, have you ever been upset by anything that's happened to you online? 70% of the time, they say no. So this is a sample of 16,000 young people, for those of you that are parents or grandparents. For the majority of young people, they've never had a negative online experience, which is quite nice to hear, really, isn't it? But when you say, for those who said that yes, there was, you say, can you explain what that is? Now, all I did was take, this will be in a book I'm writing at the moment, it comes out next year, so you're getting a sneak peek at new data here. I just took all of the descriptions of the things they described as upsetting. The biggest thing that comes out is people, somebody. It's people that are causing harm, people that are causing them upset online. Interestingly, when you unpick the content side of this, because there is a lot of concern about young people accessing inappropriate content and lots of people seeing upsetting content, an awful lot of what young people say is upsetting content relates to current affairs. So when the Manchester bombing happened, there's a lot of young people saying they saw something about Manchester bombing happening and it was really upsetting. Large amounts of young people talk about climate change, seeing coverage of climate change is really upsetting. So if we're saying we want an algorithmic intervention to stop young people seeing upsetting content, who defines what that upsetting content is? And here, you've got a very clear view that it's people that cause problems online. And I am reminded, any of you techs know what Raynham's law is? Marcus Raynham, who was a very famous cybersecurity researcher, came out with this statement a few years ago. You don't solve social problems with software. It can help, certainly. And I'm certainly not saying in this talk, leave the tech platforms alone, they've done enough. I'm saying they could do more. Absolutely, they could do more. But not with everyone else sat on the sidelines going, why aren't they sorting this out? You know, I spend a lot of time, bizarrely, looking at the drug policy world as well. Because if you look at a lot of the discussions around the Misuse of Drugs Act and similar in the 70s, the language is exactly the same. We need to stop this from happening. We've got lots of examples of prohibitive social policy that haven't worked. I'm looking around the room. Some of you will know who I mean by Zamo from Grange Hill, that very famous Grange Hill storyline. Just say no, don't take drugs. So nobody of my age has ever taken drugs because we had some very clear messages that you shouldn't take drugs because it's illegal. That's fair to say, isn't it? Some people I know of my age still take them. It is a part to play. But there are lots of other things as well. And we know that prohibition generally doesn't work. I'm going to leave you with a comment from a young person. I said to them, it was a few years ago now, I said to them, I'm going to Parliament tomorrow to talk to politicians about internet safety. What do you think internet safety is? And I think she was about 12. She came out with this statement here. It's brilliant. When I talk to young people about what we can do to help them, it is very rare a young person will ever say, can you bring big tech billionaires to heel, please? Now, there are comments around, platforms could do more. One of the really useful things that no one's talking around in the online safety bill is transparency reporting. So platforms have to publish data on how many reports they've dealt with, how many accounts they've taken down. That stuff's really useful to people like me, because young people say there's no point in reporting stuff because nothing happens. So if we're getting more and more evidence of stuff does happen, that's really, really useful. But most of the time, and bear in mind I've been doing this for 20-odd years, when I say what can we do to help, it's generally about better education. It's generally about adults not freaking out. We're not going to disclose because someone's going to take our phone off us, or someone's going to tell us off, or the classic, you shouldn't have done that, that's illegal. Pretty much a guarantee that a young person's not going to disclose concern of harm. And if you look through the online safety bill, as I'm sure you all have, because I know I have, very, very few mentions of education in the entire thing. It's almost focused on entirely one stakeholder. Now, I know Professor Baines here has talked about public health models in these sorts of areas as well. That makes a lot more sense. This is why I don't like the term online safety, because safety implies we can make people free from harm. I'd much rather look at it from acknowledging the harms, looking at how we mitigate risk of harm, and adopting harm reduction approaches within an ecosystem where we all have a part to play. Because we're all pulling in the same direction. Ultimately, we want young people to be safe online and have positive experiences. Most of them do. But sometimes things go wrong, and we need to better support that rather than just sitting there going, surely the platforms can sort this out. We've got all this AI now. It's ever so clever. So I shall finish there. We've got time for a little bit of question at the end, but for those of you that are parents or grandparents, most of the time, kids are having a really positive experience online. But that's not going to get clicks, or it's not going to sell newspapers and similar, which is why we see all the excitable stuff about terrible things. And for 20 years now, young people have been saying, I'm not going to ask for help because I know it's going to be made worse, or I'm going to get told off for it. It's very rare they say, can we have better technical interventions, please? Those tech boffins, why can't they do this? Well, if it was easy, we'd have done it by now, because it's been around for a long time. But thanks for coming out. I really hope the rain stops on your way home. But lovely to see you all. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I am Victoria Baines. I'm the Professor of IT here at Gresham and an erstwhile co-author of Andy Phippen. And we do have about 10 minutes for questions. You'll be very pleased to hear that we do have... I've seen you, sir, don't worry. You'll be very pleased to hear that we do have some very thoughtful questions online, but some which, I have to be honest, if I had to answer these, it would be a 3-hour sit-down for everybody. So... Not wanting to, pardon the pun, steal Sandra Vachter's thunder from her lecture, in your opinion, what is the legal future of this matter?
A mess, basically. There's an awful lot of talk around tech regulation, AI regulation at the moment. There are competing voices in that area as well. My view of particularly the stuff around, you need to regulate us because we're going to achieve sentience soon, is a bit like pointing over there because they don't want you to see over there. My fear is really about the more low-level stuff, like taking all of our data and using it without consent for these sorts of things, or HR departments buying a piece of kit which can assess someone's capability for the job by scanning a 5-minute video. And yes, those systems do exist, which, those sorts of things is why I talk more about AI literacy. I think one of the challenges is a lot of the policymakers, while being very bright, don't have a tech background. I was asked, I'm doing some training with some board-level folk next year, and the people organising it said, what advice would you give a board member about this sort of thing? I said, well, listen to the techs, because they're the ones who actually have to put this stuff together, and those are the ones that, it's kind of been lost in this discourse because it's almost like, well, you would say it's not possible, you don't want to do it. No, that's not my experience. So I think, short answer to it is I think it's going to be a mess for a few years. If you look, the online safety bill has reached assent now. Now the poor souls at Ofcom have to actually look at it and see how on earth you implement this spaghetti of legislation, which does read a little bit like, oh yeah, and another thing. And yeah, let's put that in as well. And if you look at the debates, it's similar to that. So I've got about 10 years before I retire. I've probably got 3 or 4 books in me around the law in this area before then. So.
I know this that we've already had some questions in Parliament, haven't we, and in select committees about will the metaverse be covered in the online safety bill? And of course the answer has been yes, of course it will be. Even though it doesn't exist yet, we've absolutely covered for it in our future-proofed legislation.
It's generally
Yes.
50-year-old blokes that think it's cool.
Yes, please watch my talk on the metaverse. Sorry, I thought I would hijack that.
Go for it.
So we have you at the front here. Do we have if you just wait a second for the mic to reach you so that the people at home can hear your question.
Can you hear me? Oh, that's better.
We can, that's better.
There was a recent documentary on one of the mainstream TV channels. It was about a generative AI system that was generating explicit pictures of child sexual abuse. The reporter was reduced to tears. I don't know if you're aware of this documentary, either of you.
I'm aware of it, and it's an area of a lot of concern at the moment, yeah.
My question is, if the AI system was trained sufficiently well on existing child pornography images so that it could generate them on request, why isn't it able to have an AI system recognize them?
Well, first of all, the production of those images is on the very edge of the sorts of things that these systems can do. And secondly, it would, or a system could potentially identify those sorts of things, depending on the training data, though. So, would you train it with actual images of child abuse, or would you train it with generated images of child abuse? And it starts to become extremely problematic in terms. So, like I said, there are some law enforcement systems that do that, but you do raise questions then of, well, that's an image of child abuse, that's someone being abused. Has that victim consented to that image being used in that way? So it starts to become an extremely heavy and complex area in terms of what the training data would look like. But this is one of the areas where clearly it's unacceptable, and clearly if you have a system that's doing that, actually I listened to a podcast about it this morning. It's on the extreme end of things, and clearly there are use cases where there really isn't any debate in terms of, oh, it's okay, because it is unacceptable to do. But the challenge is always, where does the training data come from? And what is the training data to be able to identify those sorts of things?
Gentleman at the back there, yes.
Not a very technical question, but obviously the Pandora's box is open. Everyone is addicted to their phones. And I was hearing a news article, I think it was yesterday, that every day about 4 children are killed or injured on their phones crossing roads. Is there any way AI could detect on GIS systems where that child is? I mean, could it ever be that sophisticated and basically cut off access at such points?
Now, I'm looking at some of the folk that put their hands up and said, technically, GPS-based data and things, it doesn't seem to be a massively complex one compared to something like image recognition of edge cases and similar. But it's the accuracy of the GPS that I think would be the problem with that, because our GPS isn't as accurate, for example, as military GPS or whatever. So it's how accurate it could be. And again, in that case, it sounds like a perfectly reasonable thing to do, but I think there would be challenges in the accuracy of those sorts of things. But technically, because you look at the wonders of Google Maps and the fact that it'll tell you a road's being congested and things, we know that stuff works quite well. So it's not a bad idea to explore in more detail, but I think it's not one of the sexier areas of this sort of thing. So absolutely. Well, I mean, this comes back to the fact that simple harm reduction-based education is, when Pokemon Go was a big deal, you'd get people chasing virtual Pokemon across the street into traffic and things as well. Rather than look at a technical solution, do we have these conversations in schools and things now? I look at a very large database of what is delivered in these sorts of areas in schools, and I'd say, no, it really isn't. But there's very little guidance. the last thing I would say is that teachers need to sort this out. Without guidance, they can't sort this out. And without it being treated like for those of you that look fresh-faced and young, I would imagine your online safety educational experiences were don't do it, don't look at it, and ignore it, rather than think critically about what you're doing with it. I think that's one of the fundamental challenges.
Yeah, you mentioned about some of the biases in algorithms due to lack of data collection.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some of the things that you're seeing that tech companies or maybe other organizations that they're putting together in order to offset some of these biases?
I think a lot of that is down to good ethics training in computer science courses and those sorts of things. Now, as a BCS accreditation assessor who's assessed an awful lot of degrees across the country over the years, that's certainly not uniform. You'll have some places where it's really well done. You have some places where they go, we do ethics in year one, no one's really interested in it, but you guys ask for it, so you've got to do it then. But I think there are some more fundamental challenges in what teaching about ethical IT and ethical AI is, and I'm involved with an engineering council group at the moment that's trying to look at what AI literacy education is and similar. But I think that particular issue has been discussed for a fair while now. I mean, I'd encourage everyone to look at Cathy O'Neill's TED Talk about this, which was 2016. I know you're sorry, so I just noticed you were smiling and nodding at the back there, so presumably you've seen it. It's very, very good and very sensible, and talks about the fact that one of the areas that's constantly attacked as woke now is stuff like unconscious bias training. Unconscious bias training in the development of IT systems that will then build training data that will then go on to victimize certain parts of society is an interesting. But I always fall back on the fact I've taught ethics to computer science students for many years. The first question I usually ask is, would you get on an aeroplane you'd written the software for? They always say no. Never had anyone say yes. Which is an interesting, you don't start a computer science course to study ethics. So it's how we ground it and how we make it relatable and things as well. But there's an awful lot to do in that area because it is viewed as a minor part of computer science curriculum. And again, no one's learning from the history of it. So.
And on that note, one last quick-fire question,
No
if
worries.
I may, from the online audience. Can AI protect anyone?
Not on its own. Well, it's a very broad question, isn't it? It depends what you're protecting it from and the specific use case around it, I guess. But that's what I mean about it should be seen as a useful tool. I don't know if any of you listened to the Alistair Campbell, Rory Stewart leading podcast. There was a really good interview with Paul Nurse, who is an extremely well-known scientist. And he was asked about AI, and he said, well, if you look at it as a really powerful way of processing data and decision support and those sorts of things, that's really good because, there are things we can do with that. If you look at it as the solution to everything and all the chat about artificial general intelligence and I've seen Terminator, when's that going to happen, and all those sorts of things, that starts to be, we should be looking at really good means of processing data, really powerful means of processing data, rather than going, but it's artificial intelligence, why can't it do that? And I think, can it protect anyone from anything? Well, I think it would depend on the use case, but I think conceptually we should be looking at it as a tool rather than a solution.
And on that note, we have run out of time, I'm afraid, so it only remains for me to thank you very much, Professor
Pleasure.
Andy
Thank you
Phippen.
for the invite.
Thank you.